This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 30, Antioch in Syria, Christians in Rome, and Caligula's pleasure boats. Because of Saul's persecution of the followers of the Way in Jerusalem, many of them had scattered. Some went to Phoenicia and Cyprus, others went to Antioch, the Roman capital of Syria, and the third largest city in the empire after Rome and Alexandria. Antioch, a city of about 250,000 people, was founded on the Orontes River in about 300 BCE by one of Alexander the Great's generals. When Rome, in the person of Pompey, took control in 63 BCE, Antioch was made the administrative capital of the province of Syria. Julius Caesar himself visited in 47 BCE, whereas Augustus and Tiberius did much to build up the city, including a theater, baths, a circus based on the Circus Maximus in Rome, as well as aqueducts and roads. Germanicus died there in 19 CE, and the earthquake in the time of Caligula caused him to send senators to Antioch and oversee the repairs to the aqueducts and other civil buildings. Antioch was a cosmopolitan city, mixing Greek and Oriental civilizations, cultures, and languages. There was worship of Zeus as well as Baal. The Greek and the Syrian pantheon found mixed company. There was also a significant Jewish element to the city, specifically the neighborhood in the southern part of Antioch known as the Kerateon. Among those of the sect of the Nazarene in Jerusalem who had been persecuted and fled and settled in these new locations, the practice had been to tell the story about Jesus to the Jews who were living there. They spoke to those of the Jewish faith about Jesus and how they believed that he was God's anointed one, the Messiah, or in Greek, the Christos. In Antioch, there were also some Cypriots, those from the island of Cyprus, and Cyrenians, a Roman province in modern-day eastern Libya. Some of the people were Lucius of Cyrene, Simeon Niger, and Simeon of Cyrene, who carried the cross of Jesus and was now close to Simon Peter, and Nicholas, one of the 7 deacons, who was an Antiochene convert to Judaism. All these had fled Jerusalem after the stoning of Stephen. In Antioch, they addressed not only the Jews, but now also the Greeks, and perhaps surprisingly they found a receptive audience among the latter who were accustomed to the religious panoply in the city. In that environment, Greek-speaking Antiochenes were receptive to the message about Christ, who conquered death and was raised to new life. The term Christ, or Christos, sounded remarkably similar to Christos, which meant useful or good, and was a proper name given to servants or slaves. Many in Antioch became part of the sect of the Nazarene, or followers of the Way, and to distinguish themselves as those who believed that Jesus was the Anointed, the Christ, they began to refer to themselves as Christiani, or Christians. In Rome, there was a married couple, Andronicus and Junia. They were Jewish residents of the city, and they had been in Jerusalem a few years earlier when they heard Simon Peter's proclamation at Pentecost that Jesus was the Messiah, God's anointed one, just as Ananias from Damascus had. Not only had they heard this news, but they spoke with Simon Peter himself, and also James, the brother of Jesus, and other leaders of the movement. By the time they were ready to return to Rome, they were convinced that Jesus had fulfilled the sacred writings of the Judean people in a way that had not been anticipated. They believed that Jesus was the Messiah. In fact, that's exactly what Simon Peter had said on that particular Pentecost day. Though Jesus had been killed, God raised him up and made him both Lord and Messiah. So Andronicus and Junia returned to Rome and began to share this news with many of the other Jewish people living there, including their friends, another married couple named Prisca and Aquila. Aquila was a native of Pontus, on the southern coast of the Black Sea, but he was now living in Rome with his wife, Prisca, also known as Priscilla. Together, they were tent makers. Not all were convinced of their message, however, and significant disagreements arose between those who believed that Jesus was the Messiah and those who insisted that he was not. Each had sacred texts that they could cite to prove their point. For those who said Jesus was not the Messiah, they could cite Deuteronomy and its clear statement that God's curse was on anyone who hangs on a tree. Jesus was hanged on a tree, that is, crucified, and he was therefore cursed. Case closed, end of story. Those who believed Jesus was the Messiah bypassed that text and used others instead, such as Psalm 16, which, in the words of David, says, "I saw the Lord ever before me. With him at my right hand I shall not be disturbed. Therefore my heart has been glad, and my tongue has exalted. My flesh too will dwell in hope, because you will not abandon my soul to the netherworld, nor will you suffer your Holy One to see corruption. You have made known to me the paths of life, and you fill me with joy in your presence." That seemed to be an obvious prophecy about Jesus, who was not abandoned to the netherworld, nor did he see corruption. That is, he was raised from the dead. But for those who did not believe Jesus was the Messiah, Psalm 16 was not convincing. Sometimes these disagreements over whether Jesus was the Messiah grew so fierce that brawls nearly broke out. When this happened, the crowds quickly dispersed so as not to attract the attention of the Roman authorities. As princeps, Gaius constructed pleasure boats, sometimes called floating palaces, on Lake Nemi outside Rome. They were fitted with dwellings, porticos, and baths, as though they were villas. They had marble pavements and mosaic floors, gilded decorations, and even running water for the baths, as well as rotating bronze platforms, indicative of early ball-bearing technology. The boats combined religion, luxury, engineering, and imperial self-display in a striking way. Lake Nemi, a small volcanic crater lake about 30 kilometers southeast of Rome, was sacred, as it was clearly associated with Diana Nemorensis, whose major sanctuary stood on the lake's shore. The site was ancient, venerable, and heavily ritualized long before the 1st century. Gaius placed his floating palaces on no ordinary lake. Instead, they floated on sacred water. These massive ships on a small lake reflected the princeps' attitudes and hubris. It was engineering brilliance pressed into the service of excess. He treated this sacred space as his own private playground. And as an aside, one reason we today know so much about these floating palaces is that between the years 1929 and 1932, Mussolini drained Lake Nemi and recovered them. One was about 70 meters long, and the other was about 73 meters long. Archaeology confirmed the ancient literary claims and also revealed lead water pipes stamped with Caligula's name: Gaius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus. Unfortunately, as the German Nazi forces retreated from that region in 1944, they set fire to these archaeological treasures and the museum that Mussolini had built to house them. So few fragments remain. But during the time of Caligula, these ships were enjoyed by the princeps and his court. Imperial power overrode sacred tradition. I'll post the website for the modern museum of the ships in the show notes, as well as a link to the archaeological site of the ancient Temple of Diana at Nemi. Next time, we'll hear about Herod Antipas and his wife Herodias' attempt to gain more power with the princeps, and some trouble brewing in Jamnia of Judea.